I'd like to start out by saying thank you. This is my second HINT Summit. I attended the one last year in Denver. I was blown away and inspired by your missional focus on your patients and their families, and I have seen that again this year, so thank you for what you do. So as Delicia said, my name is Caroline Young. I work for a venture capital firm based in Nashville, Tennessee, Frist, Cressy Ventures. And all day, every day, we are thinking about working with founders, investing in their businesses, and helping them grow and scale. So that's my world. But it's not your world. Every day, you all are running your practices and caring for your patients and their families. But at some point, it does come time to think about growing the business. How do you bring in outside capital to do that? This can be a very opaque world, kind of a scary topic, and we're going to spend the next set of minutes talking with these three DPC leaders about how they have chosen to forge that path and bringing on outside partners to scale their business. So we're going to kick off by having each of them share with you just a couple minutes about their organizations and how they have chosen to scale them up to this point. So I'm going to look to my right here and have John kick us off.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I've been to most of the HINT events, and I feel like this one's great. So Zach, good job, and it's been super fun so far, guys. So I'm John Collier. I'm the founder and CEO of Proactive MD. Proactive MD is headquartered out of Greenville, South Carolina. We started Proactive in January of 2016. And Proactive is primarily an enterprise-based direct primary care. So that means we work with mostly employers. We also have some strategic payer relationships, and we also do some consumer-based direct primary care. We have about 100 sites in 19 states and growing. And so from a funding perspective, our strategy has been really to bootstrap and do it as much as we possibly can. We have had one strategic partner who has been an investor from the beginning and who has strategically placed different rounds of funding in us along the way to make sure that we have been able to operationalize our growth.
Great, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thanks again. Just one quick round of applause for HINT, just putting this on, and the community they've created in direct primary care is just second to none. And so really thankful for Zach and his leadership and Beth for just including us in this panel and being able to share what we've learned. But to be honest, we started just a couple of years ago, kind of in the same way that many of you all out there sit, and kind of thinking of this idea. And I put my mugshot up on the screen there. So part of it was we really had this vision with our chief medical officer and founder, Dr. Lazapina, and he was leading a residency and just saw what was happening as providers moved out into the for-profit space, their divorce rates and all those things, and their debt that they were kind of having to wrestle with. He just felt like I couldn't do this, and he kept telling them, go start DPC, and they couldn't really ever take that and go do it, and so he said, I got to go do it myself. And so with that conviction, we really felt like it was our chance to go and share a vision of how we can help create a platform to free new residents coming out of school and really have an opportunity to serve in the direct primary care space and creating that platform and mitigating the risk for them. And so that's really turned into, over the last couple of years, we're now at 9 clinics. We're in South Texas. We're on the Mexico border and the Gulf Coast. So if you go too far south, you're going to have to turn around because the border is there. But it's a really great community. It's 99% Latino. And we're growing to 12 clinics by the end of the year. We have about 10,000 members right now with a couple of really big opportunities to serve what will be about 30,000 members by 1/1. So we're excited about that growth and opportunity, primarily spending our efforts in the business side, and so looking at public and private companies to make sure that we could serve school districts and municipalities has been a really big win for us. But we really have built that really around 4 main tenets of our business, and that was obviously the direct primary care being foundational to that, The second element of that was our Frontier Health Access, and so we really took it upon ourselves to go and do those direct contracts with ancillary and specialty providers to help drive down the cost for folks. And then the third tenet being really the Frontier Health Plan, and so we kind of put that together, learned that self-funding model through Hint and through like Health Rosetta and Free Market. And then the fourth part was we really knew that the data was important to us, and so we kind of started building our own EHR and billing and all of those things to be able to integrate and have access to that data for employers so that we could push claims information, $0 claims and stuff like that to the TPAs and really partner with what those large companies needed to have access to that data. And so kind of took that upon ourselves to really say, let's go, make this really viable in our market. So that's where we're at and what we do.
Thank you. Kyle?
I'm Kyle Rickner, Primary Health Partners, and I'm just honored to be the one dumb doctor on stage here. I love being up here with these guys, John and Joe, and what they've done has been fantastic. I do want to say to the doctors that are out there that there's actually a representation here that we all need help along the way. We know a lot about doing medicine. We don't always know all that we need to know, right, about doing business. And so one of the key elements with us growing from a single practice with my partner, Dr. Robert Lockwood, and by the way, you always choose really smart, good partners. That makes a big difference. To growing now, we've got 11 locations and we have 26 providers, is having the infrastructure and the help along the way. And I always hesitate when we talk about growth and funding growth and what we are now. Sometimes there's pats on the backs and things like that, but I look at it like everyone has a journey, and we've heard a lot about everybody's journeys here over this weekend. And there's no one right journey, there's not a wrong journey, and they're all meeting needs and filling gaps in community. So I just wanted to make that clear. We've chosen to work with employers just like Frontier and Proactive. I think one of the differences, our practice is about 50-50. We're retail or community-based 50% of the time, and then the other half of our members are employers. No doubt we're going to be growing in employer space. We've committed a lot of resources and personnel to that. We want to serve those businesses. Earlier today on stage it was said that by Mark, Dr. Tomasulo from Peak Med, that anytime we introduce the idea, no one says, well, that's really dumb. I kind of like the other way. I want to do that. The status quo seems to serve me best. Well, that really doesn't happen. So the gap there is an educational one. And so we're really about putting people in the field and putting as much information as we can out there to fill that gap. We've really grown primarily two ways. We got some really smart help early on. We took on 2 partners in our second year. Not that they threw a bunch of capital at us, but they threw a lot of brain power. They had built and grown a very large DME company and sold it. They kind of knew what it meant to scale from a garage to in all 50 states. And we'd never done that before. And I've known those guys for a long time. So Dr. Lockwood and I brought on 2 partners early on in our second year. They've helped us look at so many things in so many different ways, and there's been a steep learning curve. So Todd and Brian are their name, and we really are thankful for them. And then a really important element to our growth also came in January of 21. We brought on sort of a financial guru guy that came alongside us named Frank, and has done magic with numbers that we could have never imagined doing. So having a lot of smart people around you might make you look a little bit smarter, but it really just helps us learn about what's the right way to really scale a business. The other aspect of us, I think I'm up here kind of to represent the bootstrappers in the world, to just kind of do it as you go. And I'll be happy to talk with any of you offline about this, but one of our main funding sources has been clinical research programs. So we run those at multiple of our clinics. And that has just been such a blessing. It was not a plan from the beginning. It just kind of came on, and then it was one of the blessings. Unfortunately, it came out of COVID, where our clinical research program just really took off and really helped our funding. So that's really been our organic means of growth, and we hope to really accelerate it in the next 24 months or so. But that's what's really gotten us to where we are today.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Kyle. So you mentioned the growth journey. I'd love to kind of rewind with each of you. And how did you know when it was time to start thinking about raising capital, bringing on outside partners? How did you even get started? And John, I'm going to toss that one over to you.
It's a great question. So I think it all goes back to being able to, we have a philosophy at PractiveMD that we're only always about our patients, and we promise to fight for their greatest good. And so anything we do and whenever we look at, we want to make sure we can operationalize everything with absolute excellence. And so early on, some of the relationships we had were employer-based, and so these employer-based contracts, you can work with them, and depending on how you set them up, they will actually help fund a lot of it. And so we were having a lot of growth in the employer space, and actually going into multiple states. And it was a good friend, mentor, really an advisor to the company that said, I think it's time to infuse a little bit of capital in to make sure that you have the team that can scale this. And so that was step one, and so, but that was a big decision for us. And so I would say the biggest thing that we wanted to factor in, and something that I had to personally consider is, in talking with my team, is making sure that it was aligned capital, and making sure, when I say aligned capital, that they didn't just see us as a great investment opportunity, but that they truly bought into that patient promise, and that, at the end of the day, they were going to come alongside and help fight for our patients' greatest good as well. And so we found a partner like that believed in our mission, that believed in the vision, and wanted to come along every step of the way. And so that's been really exciting for us.
Terrific. Joe, would you like to add anything about when you guys knew it was time?
Yeah, I think the same thing is we started identifying a sweet spot with small businesses, and then kind of learned more about the self-funding space, and that was an opportunity. We said, in order to take those larger groups to make an impact in our community, we had to have more locations and more providers to facilitate and keep the pure DPC, a limited panel and subscription and the costs low for folks. And so same thing. We had to build a team of people. It was obviously you can't wear every hat, especially if you're working in the business every day as a primary care provider. There's a lot of time you just work on the business now with finance and legal documents and working with great attorneys and all that space. And so once we kind of knew that market opportunity was right, we built a team. We didn't say how to do it. We said who's going to do it. And that's a big principle is everybody has a great plan until you get punched in the face, right? That's Mike Tyson's famous quote. And so we've been punched in the face a lot, and having the team that responds well to that was critical. And so ultimately aligned our vision with that, and we took that into our investors. And so a lot of family offices, high net worth individuals, small firms, and so they had the ability to say, yes, we believe in the mission, and we're not here just for short-term gains. We're here to make a change in our community and in our state, and so that really made it easy to go through this together.
That's great.
I think one of the differences that we're talking about is in the beginning, when you start a practice, you're really worried about growing your practice. And I remember Robert and I having the conversations leading up to opening in January of 16. Is this going to work? It was still kind of weird back then. And once we realized this is going to work, and we brought on a third physician that was from the practice we were at, and it was going well. And after the 1 year mark, a patient of mine that I've already mentioned, Todd, he said, man, we got to grow this thing. You can't just keep this. And so I remember talking to Robert, and I said, man, it's like the vocational gospel. It's like the good news. So do you want to really keep this from patients, and do you want to not get more doctors involved? And we had unfortunately been part of a health system organization where we got to deal with all the unhappy doctors, and we knew how unhappy they all were. And so really it wasn't about just giving a better experience to patients. It was about rescuing physicians. We had no idea how we might do that in the beginning. And so it was in that moment that we said, well, this isn't just about growing a practice, it's about building a business. And that's when we realized, if we're going to do this, let's bring on the help. Let's do it thoughtfully. Let's do it strategically. We wanted to do it organically, so we didn't take really outside funds, but we wanted to grow it without debt because we wanted it to be a successful business. So our growth was a little bit slower at first and started to take off later, but it was really about building a firm and solid foundation with people and operations that can be built on. And, the foundation isn't 100% finished, but we're still working on it. But I think for us, it was when we started stopping to think about growing a practice and started thinking about building a business.
Let's stick with that foundation, and this is really for any of you. And we talked about this as we were discussing the panel, that there are some things you've got to get right first before you're ready to bring in outside capital, some fundamentals that have to be laid. And I'm curious if you all want to share a little bit more. Dr. Kyle mentioned the foundation. Joe, John, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for us, the operational part was really critical. I came from a nonprofit ministry world, and so I had raised funds in that vein, but we called our expense report a revenue and expense report, not a P&L. And so Bib, our CEO, coming from a multifamily development, arena and what he had done in that space, we had to have a common language. And then Dr. Pete never had really looked at finances in that way before, and so didn't know what either one of those were. And so we really kind of had to say, hey, what can we do? So we actually, now I would recommend this to anybody, we used a book called Traction, which is a great entrepreneurial operating system. And so it gave us an aligned platform for everything from our business meeting agendas to how we operate and report on things to how we wrap a score around everything we do, so everything has data, so we don't make a project that isn't measured. And so that really has been great for us to be able to say, hey, we can at least operate from the same book here, and that was really key to that. And then the other thing was, like, if you were going to take on capital, we knew we had to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to squander that quickly. You will put it into the next great idea that you haven't researched, and boom, it's gone overnight. And so to really be conservative in that approach, to be honest with our investors, to say, hey, we've got different variances here if things don't go this way or that way, where we're going to be able to land. And so we were all aligned in that way, and that was key to us then having the vision to go pitch with our financial partners.
Great.
I completely agree with that, is having something that's operationally excellent but also scalable. And so when anybody's looking to invest in the company, and it has to be a scalable model, it has to be, you have to have a solid business plan that you can prove it's going to, withstand time. And then exactly to your point is having a plan. How are you going to allocate that capital? How are you going to use it and put it to work?
I think a big part of our foundation starts with the big picture. What's the mission? And we want to restore the doctor-patient relationship, and then we wanted to build values and principles within the organization that support the mission. And then what develops out of all of that is the culture that really affects everything that you do. And I love what John said earlier is we have a culture of excellence. We don't settle for less, because when you work in an environment of excellence, everyone benefits. And so then you start to develop the processes around how you do everything that you do and make sure it all points built within the principles and the pillars, and it points to the mission and helps grow the mission. So everything from just how you run the offices day to day, how you hire staff, how you recruit doctors, how you hire doctors, everything that you do, how you engage with employers, how do you go in sales, what's your sales cycle like for the employer, and how do you close that? And then for us, one of the things that we're passionate about is customer service. Let's get back to treating the patients like they're customers. And what that means is they're sort of become the center of everything, and we revolve everything around them. And so I like to think of us as a customer service organization that happens to deliver healthcare. And so those are some of the foundational elements. And like John said also, they have to be repeatable and scalable, duplicable in any environment. And so that just takes some time, and none of us, I would think, would say we're perfect at it yet, but we're working on it. And to me, that's really that foundation, Caroline.
Great, thank you. So John, I want to jump back to two words that you shared just a few minutes ago, and that was aligned capital. At Frist Cressy Ventures, we spend a lot of time before investing getting to know the founders, the founding CEOs. We need to make sure we're in sync with our priorities and we're both focused on the same end goals, because the investor-CEO relationship is much like a marriage, and it will probably be multi-year. So I'm curious, as you all began the process of bringing in outside capital and thinking about scale, how did you assure this aligned capital?
Yeah. So for us, this happened to be, and I'm very fortunate, very lucky that our capital partner was a longtime friend, a longtime mentor, a healthcare leader himself who was all about our mission, our vision, and who really helped craft a lot of that. And so we were very fortunate. And so there was already a relationship established. But as we look to the future, we have some non-negotiables. And I think it's super important that if we are ever going to think about taking on outside capital, that they have to be in alignment with us. And so what I would say is, if you look over the last few years, this has been in a really exciting time in the primary care space. And you've seen an influx of a tremendous amount of capital flooding our space. So in the larger enterprise employer markets that we compete in, everybody is owned by private equity. So the top 5 groups, they're all owned by private equity. And actually, in the last year, we've implemented 26 sites, and of those 26 sites, 24 of them were takeovers. And when you spend time with the employers, and the reason we took over those sites, those employers would say something changed when private equity moved in. And I'm not against private equity or funding. It's just making sure that those partnerships are aligned and that you are not willing to compromise on those non-negotiables. And so again, for us, it's about our patients. I want to work for our patients. I want to work for our employer partners, and I don't want to work for shareholders at the end of the day. I mean, we have a mission and a vision to transform healthcare, leveraging the power of advanced primary care. And so building those non-negotiables for yourself is something that I would say is very important.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what was said, and just, our first investment came from, a high net worth individual that wanted to support us. And so they were really going to invest in talent and an idea. And it wasn't about, it being a perfect run to growth, but they wanted to see Dr. Lazapina succeed because they were a member and they had experienced what, direct primary care felt like. And they were paying high dollar concierge care in their other city, several $20,000 a year, I think was the number for this kind of level of access. And to see it happen for, $50 a month, $60 a month was like unheard of. And he saw the vision of, I want this to be available for my employees. I want this to be available for my community. And he just loved Dr. Pete and his vision, and was a mentor to Bib and some business stuff, and a donor of mine in our ministry things. And so it was a win-win for him to say, here's 3 guys I've really liked being around, and I want to see them succeed. And I think the concept they have is really a righteous act. It's something that's going to disrupt what is taxing me as a business owner and taxing my employees in their out-of-pocket expenses. And so that was the aligned incentive we needed. And as we've gone into other family offices in that space, it was very much the same thing. We would let them experience direct primary care first, and then they would say, okay, I get it. And that was something to like, come and see what we're doing. And then we knew that taking on, institutional funds, your fiduciary responsibility changes from being, patients first to investors. And so we had to be very clear that we were not here to pervert the model of direct primary care. We wanted to make sure that that model could go to market. And so they were behind saying, let's keep it pure. Let's keep panels low. Let's keep, patients first. Even to the fact that we were like, hey, we want to invest in a chief customer experience officer. So we were able to bring that on to just like he said, just being able to make sure that that customer experience was number one, because that's what matters. And if you do good business with people, then the profits will follow.
I think it's more of a perspective question for me. We haven't taken outside funding, but I love the analogy of a marriage. And I think one thing I wanted to say is you have to start with the end in mind. Like, where do you want to end up? What's the goal? And if your goal is to grow and scale, it's going to take money. And so then you've got a decision to make about how do you get that money. So our pattern of doing it organically will take us to a certain point, but we know we're going to have to take some outside money. So the way that we look at that is that it has to be an alignment with who we are, so that an investment would actually make us more of who we are, make us better than who we actually are. So I look at it as much as I want to know them. Caroline mentioned, she said, I want to get to know the founder and CEO. Well, I turn that back and say, we're going to want to know them very, very well and want to interview them. I've got a serious responsibility to tens of thousands of patients that whatever I do that might affect them, I better do it with the right thing in mind. And I think our company motto of doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons even governs the idea and context of taking on more funding.
So like a marriage or a relationship, there are bumps in the road, there are arguments. Any tips from any of you all on working through those times of misalignment with your partners?
So I would say communicate. Be as communicative as possible. So, our partner and I, we talk every week. I mean, sometimes multiple times a week, and we're constantly texting each other. Right now he's in Slovakia, and I was texting him right now about this conversation. But I think communication is key, and lean into them. These partners are partners for a reason, and they can really help. And so my recommendation would be communication and leaning on them.
Great.
Yeah, I would say, it's very easy to say, hey, we're both attractive, right? Like, we've got a cool little business here, and you've got lots of funds, and this should work. But just like a marriage, just being attractive isn't enough. You have to have those aligned values. I would also say good paper makes good partners, and so a prenup is pretty good to put in place there with clear boundaries around, who's in authority and control when we need to make decisions, and ultimately, hey, they're an investor, but they're not living this every day with you. But you do have that direct access to them too. So it's a DPC relationship with your investors to make sure that, hey, when I call, I need your advice. And that was something where we just told a lot of them, like, we don't want to pay the dumb tax. They've been there. They've scaled companies. We want your advice, not just your capital. And so it was a similar thing is talking with your spouse, like, there's a role that we need you to play alongside each other. And that was the same way in the business with our investors.
Great.
I clearly thought from the beginning when we brought on partners that we were getting intellectual equity and experiential equity. But to all of the doctors and founders in the room, it's your baby, right? And it took me a little while to learn that sometimes some good critical intellectual equity, we don't need to take it personal. So I would say our bumps in the road was me sort of being a little bit more of emotionally releasing this and realizing let me look at this from an outside perspective, and let me actually learn from them and learn to grow it. So I would say our bumps in the road was, marriage isn't perfect, and you're going to have arguments, and maybe you might even have fights, but you learn how to fight fair and come out on the other side, and you're actually better for it. So almost taking advice and criticism and not getting too emotional and personal with that. They're not one to throw your baby out with the bathwater. They're there to actually help. So just to view it in that light is very helpful.
So my last question here before we go to the audience, and it's back to that. You mentioned this is your baby. I mean, this is a very special part of your life. But how do you retain, or how do you position to retain some influence, some agency within this new relationship with your partners?
Well, I would just say we were very fortunate. Our partners made it very clear that Robert and I were going to run the business, and we were going to stay open to their guidance and direction, but they didn't really have any desire to grow and run a business. They had already done that. So that sort of was an understanding from the beginning that worked well in our organization.
I would agree. I would say very similarly, having expectations laid out ahead of time and making sure that there's absolute agreement. And again, going back to that word, I keep using absolute alignment. And so communicate.
Yeah, we would say the same thing. I think the other part of this is with the core team that's leading the business with you, there's also opportunities in this to give them equity, whether it's other providers that are working alongside you or your key management team or whatever that looks like. But that agreement, those clear roles, defined strategies, quarterly goals, that kind of space was something we always invited our investors to be a part of. So when we have a state of the company meeting or we do a quarterly meeting, they can have access to that because it's something that we want to operate in transparency in DPC, and that means not just our patients, but also our investors as well.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, I think we have a few minutes for Q&A from you guys. Anyone have a question?
Hey, Tanner Moore from North Carolina. Just a quick question about how you've structured taking on those investors. Have you done anything other than exchange equity in your company? Like, are there some of them that are open to just kind of making it more of a loan or something more creative as you've gone along?
I have not structured anything like that. Most of ours have been in equity exchange, but I do think that there are avenues to go down, especially right now in the marketplace, that you could look at it from more of a debt perspective.
Yeah, we did have some of that structure where there was, obviously an upfront capital investment that captured equity for the investment, but ultimately there was also lines of credit, and that we, could do things in tranches, and so. We might say, hey, for each clinic, we're going to take another $250,000 of a tranche to seed that clinic to be able to hire that doctor. But it was contingent on like a contract. So we got a contract and a clinic and a lease sign. Here comes the tranche of investment, so that we were, working hand in hand, and there was good metrics around controlling that spend.
Okay. Any questions? Right here.
So I think a lot of us are probably pretty idealistic and want to see that our company keeps the values that made us start it in the first place. It feels like to me that anytime you give anybody any equity, you give up some of your ability to control the values. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
I am passionate about culture and who we are. And I lived in that tension that you're describing for a while. Well, if this is who we are and this is what I like it to feel like, then if I give up some control, I may be compromising some of that. Honestly, it's why they want to be involved in the beginning. And I think we could have a lot more success in DPC overall if some of us as physicians were willing to actually relinquish some control and trust and bring on some trusted partners. It's a hard thing. I know it's easy for me to say I've done it. It's going well for us. But in the process, they've allowed us to grow our culture and enhance our values. And I would say we're far better today than we were when they first got involved.
I think it also goes back to how you structure it as well, because I mean, it does. I mean, when you found something, it feels very personal, almost like a child. You're pouring so much into it, and so I think if you're going to give someone equity, even if they buy into it, you have to again make sure it's the right partner, and then that you set it up appropriately, and that there are some safety rails in place to make sure that things aren't going to go out of whack, especially for your patients.
I would say that your core values are what make you attractive. And so we were very clear about, this is our vision, this is who we are, here are our 4 core values, and here are the 3 things we're going to execute really well, and the places we weren't willing to flex or bend. That was important to the investors that came alongside. And you have to be willing to say no and push back. And I'll just be honest, I know when you're in that growth state, it feels like this might be the only person I feel like I'll ever meet with this much capital to invest in us, and so what's going to happen? But it has been a constant, just meeting new people. There's a lot of people that want to invest in things like this, and so it's a little bit of next man up. If you don't like what we're going to do, then that's okay. We have other people that want to join in with this, and so I would just encourage you not to be like, that's the only fish in the sea. There are plenty, and to stick strong to where you believe you need to be practicing and how you need to do it, and execute with that, and they'll be coming alongside you. They follow your vision.
Got a quick question for you. So when you speak about investors or partners, is that the same thing as sharing ownership? Because it seems like there's some laws that are out there about the corporate practice of medicine and how that relates to non-doctors owning medical practices. So how do you navigate that?
That's a great question. So you do, as a non-physician, you have to set your corporate structure up in a way that, one, allows you to take funding or investment, and that will protect you from infringing on the corporate practice of medicine. And there are ways to do that in a way that you would hold it, and then it's where they would invest would not be part of the corporate practice of medicine. And I'm happy to talk offline on how you can set that up for sure.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think talking about the MSO operation, having the LLCs around that, there's several ways to do it. Each state can be a little bit different. Having good legal counsel to walk you through that is it's pretty easy to find in this community. I think Kat's out here somewhere. She's great at kind of helping that. So I'll load her up with a bunch of business cards here later. But yeah, that's go seek the folks that have looked around that corner and learn from them, because paying the dumb tax in that way and having to rework legal structure is a nightmare. And so do it right the first time.
So we just finished the nightmare. And we were not structured initially to expand elsewhere and be in compliance with corporate practice of medicine laws. I'm thankful we found it out ahead of time, or before we did it, and didn't have to retract, but we had to restructure our company. And I got really sick of asking Candace what was the size of check we wrote those lawyers this month, because it's painful. I'm still trying to get over it, if you can't tell. But we really had to be structured. There's a way to do it. And the other thing I'll just say, every single state is different on the way they structure those laws and enforce those laws. And so before you think about going into a different state, you need to talk to someone in that state and find out about how it operates in that state. The structure we have now that we paid dearly for, if I didn't mention that, is can go into all 50 states, but my little investigation of the states, there's several that I don't think we ever want to be in. So.
Right here.
So what are your recommendations for the best strategy on finding the right kind of investors? For context, we're in Texas, also in San Antonio, just a little ways up the road from Joe here. So what's the best strategy? How do you find these people?
I I think it really also all depends on the size of your company, or the size of your health centers, which will be the kind of investor partners that may have the appetite. But I think getting out there and maybe, I know San Antonio probably has a solid angel network, and getting out there and just networking and talking. And there's definitely different startup networks and angel networks and VC opportunities. I'd be happy to talk with you offline and give you some tips for sure on that. But I think networking is key.
Yeah. And I would just add, happy to talk with you offline about that as well.
Clint Flanagan, really appreciate this talk and wish we could go on for another hour or two. The last discussion was about scaling DPC, and this one's about funding the growth of DPC, and it's awesome to see these grass fires, right? Like John, you have 100 some clinics. Joe, you've got all of South Texas. Kyle, you guys have Oklahoma. And I think the common thread here in the different ways that you funded things is there's physician leadership and or ownership, right? And so for the solo DPC doctor that's in San Antonio or Austin, it's great to just continue with that practice. But as you see up here on stage, there's also ways, in with what Dr. Rob talked about, to join organizations like this or to come through an MSO and or have some funding. And I know there's a lot of, let's say, angst or concern when we think about like PE funding and what we're doing. But as long as there's smart people and people that care about patients and physician leadership, it's going to be so much better than the status quo. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. What y'all have created, you have investors and physician leadership in your organizations. With DPC as the common thread, what y'all have created is tremendous. And you compare that to a United PPO network or a Cigna fee-for-service doctor or a health system, that's the status quo. And we will beat that all the time, no matter who invests in us, okay, as long as we have physician leadership and ownership. So I think we should remember that, because some stuff that goes on in social media, like, just totally really gets at the PE lane. And there are, I think, reasonable and good people in that lane, and investors like John has found that are wanting to support this. And last time I checked, 150 million Americans need DPC through their employer. That's who we should be solving for. So I just want to applaud you guys for your growth and what you've done.
Thank you, Clint.
Thanks.
Appreciate
I would say one thing back to your question real quick on looking for local resources. So one is, talk to a local CPA. They kind of know, who's looking for opportunities. There's a lot of people that share that. Another thing is your members. Tell them the vision that you want to grow bigger. They are commonly connected. Once you find one, I would call these in the nonprofit world cats. And so high net worth individuals, family offices, they're not out late at night at the bar hanging out. They're up early eating breakfast. And so it was a great spot they knew where each other were. And so they began sharing the idea and the vision amongst themselves and bringing in new partners for us along the way.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. Kyle, Joe, John, thank you for your candor and your participation, and thank you, Hint Health.